Hello, and welcome to Wine with Weeda, the podcast that is dedicated to engaging with health professionals and caregivers in meaningful discussions. I'm your host, Rita Shamoon, or as my clients call me, Weeda. I'm a pediatric speech pathologist, and I am so excited to have you here. Each week, we deep dive into connecting you with caregivers and healthcare professionals, sharing their insights, stories, and key takeaways to help you with your child's diagnosis and your journey. Whether you are a parent, healthcare professional, a lifetime learner, or simply a wine enthusiast, you're in the right place. So let's sit back and relax and enjoy today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Wine with Weeda. Hope everyone's okay with lead up to Christmas and the manic that's starting to happen with all the appointments that you have to wrap up, unnecessary Christmas presents that we have to buy, and just all the lunches and dinners that we have to attend before the end of year. So today on Wine with Weeda, I am interviewing a speech pathologist, but not for speech pathology content, but for the side of her child being diagnosed with autism. I am graced by the beautiful Natasha Piccolo. How are you, Natasha?
Hi, Rita. Thanks for having me. I'm
Thank you for
good,
coming.
thanks.
You're good?
Yeah. How are you?
Yeah, good, good. I feel like my throat is a little bit sore. I had a rough day with some clients, but keeping hydrated as we do.
Absolutely. I've got my vibe tonight. So, no
Oh,
wine, but my vibe, which is a probiotic drink, I think. So it
Vibe.
claims
Never heard
to
of
be.
it. What does it do?
Supposed to be good for your gut health, but I just like the citrus, so we'll go with that.
Look, anything that sells it, right?
Absolutely.
So, Tash, thank you so much for coming on Wine with Weeda. You approached me because you wanted to raise awareness around your son who is autistic
hmm
and your journey that you've been on. Firstly, thank you for contacting me. And secondly,
Absolutely.
it's been an honor to finally meet you virtually.
Thank you. You too.
So we connected, I feel, even last year when I started my business and just working in Southwest Sydney. You own a clinic in Southwest, yeah,
Yeah.
called Resonate Holistic, sorry. Tell me
Yeah.
about your business.
Yeah, so Resonate Holistic has been, I think, officially born for 5 years now. I launched pre-COVID, um, but I was working for myself 3 years prior to actually opening the clinic myself. At the moment, it's me and my beautiful AHA Crystal, and we have a space in Gledswood Hills, but we also do mobile intervention, schools, homes, nursing homes, and we see across the lifespan, really. Like, I think the youngest client we've had on the caseload this year was a year old, and the eldest we've had is 100 and something with swallowing. So yeah, we cover a scope for sure.
So you're looking for more clients if we open up the channel for your waiting list, or are you fully booked?
Fully booked, books are closed, and I hate saying that because we could do a whole podcast on that, Rita, like wait
Yeah, I
list
know.
and moving through caseloads, but um, that can be a whole other day. But yeah, so Resonate was born out of um, the love to communicate, really. And prior to that, my my journey in my early career was private practice in the eastern suburbs, and then public health in at Westmead Hospital. So
Oh, maybe
yeah,
that's where we connected because I worked at Westmead when I was at uni. Oh, hold on, no. I was at uni, so I think even our times didn't cross paths. I was a ward clerk when I was at Westmead Hospital for many years,
uh-huh.
but you wouldn't have been a speechy when I
No,
was
not
there
yet.
because I graduated before you. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, alright. Wow, so were you in adults at Westmead Hospital or pediatrics?
Adults. So adult
Mm.
dysphagia was my jam, and I job shared with a beautiful colleague and friend of mine. And yeah, I think after I finished at Westmead, I felt like I had covered the scope, well, a wide enough scope of practice to then go out on my own. So yeah, decided to make that leap, and then COVID hit. So the rest
Yeah,
of
I
this
know,
year.
and let's not talk about COVID. I feel like that was like a century ago, and just even though it was just a few years ago, it just feels like a lifetime ago. I wanted to raise something that I read in your bio, which just really pulled some heartstrings.
Mhm.
Natasha is always looking to use her words to empower the words of others. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna say that again. Natasha is always looking to use her words to empower the words of others. Now, the fact that that's written and you're here to share your story,
Yeah.
without a doubt, Tash, your words tonight are definitely going to support so many parents going through the journey of their
Mhm.
child's diagnosis, but also on the flip side of being a clinician with how
Yes.
we navigate and support parents with through
Yeah.
their
The
journey and
process.
NDIS. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can
So
start unpacking this
with
if you
yeah, let's
like.
start unpacking. Yeah. Tell me, there's also just a bit of a lag, so maybe I should just stop talking and review your body language before I start to talk.
That's okay.
So
That's
tell me about your gorgeous family.
okay. So I live at home with my beautiful autistic son, Alfie. He is 3. He's almost 4. I can't believe that I organised his party yesterday, his 4th
Ooh,
birthday.
when's his
Um,
birthday?
December, first
Can we
week of
say the night?
December.
Oh, because I'm December 13.
There you go. He's
Oh,
before
is he a
that.
Saggy? Oh,
He's a
okay.
Saggy. He's a Saggy.
Team
Um,
Saggy.
oh yeah, Firehouse. So yeah, so that's Alfie, and my husband Vince and I have been together for a very, very long time, since we were high school sweethearts. So we're
Mm,
a small little knit. We've got a beautiful, wide, extended circle, family and friends that support us. And I think as we go through this story, I think I want to state from the top as well that I'll acknowledge my privilege in this situation. Firstly, being a clinician myself and knowing the process on how to get diagnosed when the first signs were there that my child was definitely neurodiverse. So I think I do have to acknowledge that I have the lived experience of going through the system, and it was definitely and still is a journey, but that I also know the system and I know it from the point of advocacy for on the client perspective. So I just really want to say that as well, that I will share openly because that is my experience and my honest experience, but I do want to also acknowledge that it is hard for families who may not even be aware of what's going on, and perhaps they saw their speech therapist or their occupational therapist, as the story usually goes, and that professional is often one of the first to maybe highlight neurodiversity in that child. So yeah, from the head, let's just say that. But for me, I think for our journey anyway, Alfie is a brilliant boy. Like brilliant's an understatement. The things that he comes out with, he does access speech, so he is a speaking communicator, mouth words. But the things he comes out with just blow us away. And I think very, very early on, we could see signs of difference in him, and that his brain power was just operating at a level that was surpassing a lot of milestones. That I was like, okay,
mm,
I need to kind of just keep my eye on this. Initially, we could see from very, very early on that he was hypermobile, and I think he was 9 months old when I I could see his wrists particularly were very, very flexible, and I had in the back of my head just the idea that if I didn't see change in his joints by closer to 14, 15 months, then we would start physiotherapy. Um, I also, would say at this point, my 2 sisters are OTs, and
mm.
they also agreed with that idea. They were like, "There's definitely hypermobility here, but it could just be an isolated thing." And he's so young; he was, like I said, 9 months at the time. Um, Regardless, go and get it assessed if you feel like you need to. But when we're unpacking this journey, this is peak COVID as well. So
Yeah,
we were
yeah.
in lockdown at the time.
Tash, you mentioned, at 9 months you notice hypermobility. Now, for someone who's listening, they don't know what that is. Did you want to explain it? Now, just from my point of view, two of my daughters were diagnosed with hypermobility too,
Yeah.
and we accessed physio because I noticed concerns with their gross motor. One particularly, she was walking, shuffling on her knees
Yeah.
because she just found it too hard to stand. So, and I respect the fact that you mentioned your being a speaker, you have that significant awareness of development. So we're able to
Mm,
identify things much earlier
yeah.
because parents come to us after they've seen the pediatrician, so a few years down the track, but we can
Mm,
notice it even before they're one. So yeah, thank you for saying that because yes, it is a privilege that we have that information to support our own children and any other families that we're with. But in my case, yeah, I did notice, and we access physio to support her gross motor development. Now back to
yeah.
you. Do you want to know what label what symptoms you noted with your son?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like we'll go back to the hypermobility. Essentially, you've got mobility in your joints, and again, I'm not a physio, so physios,
No.
please come at me if you need to correct it. But essentially, when you're hypermobile, you're overextending the use of that range of movement to a point where it could be detrimental or dangerous for that person. And I know, like for sure, Alfie's definitely accident prone because of it. So that's hypermobility, I guess, in a really quick
Mm,
nutshell. But yeah, we basically got to 14 months and we still weren't walking. So that was a big one too. I knew that if we got to 18 months, we definitely were going to go down a full workup for um, his motor skill, essentially.
mm,
But at this time, so at 14 months, we're definitely well and truly speaking. Um, I absolutely love the world of Gestalt language processing that we have, as speech pathologists come across in the last, I would say 3 years. It's really
mm,
risen to prominence in practice. And just for the audience, Gestalt processing is when you are learning from Gestalts, which is scripting. So repeating, echolalia is often your first sign that somebody is learning in that way. But repeating favorite TV shows or songs or scripts from just common phrases that that child's hearing that has meaning for that person. So Alfie was definitely learning to speak in a Gestalt way. And again, I noted that. So I was like, okay, we've got a few little interesting flags here that we are neurodiverse in some capacity. I think the penny dropped for me when he was 18 months. He unfortunately had a lot of respiratory issues at the time. We spent a lot of time in and out of hospital that winter, right around his 18th month mark, and we were in ED. I was speaking to an ED doctor. I thought he was asleep in the pram. He was not. He was processing everything I was saying. So I honestly thought he was asleep. And then we were discharged, and I think it was 5 days later, we were at the GP's office, and I was saying to my husband, "Oh, we've got to see Doctor blah 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 blah." And Alfie piped up, "Oh, that's Doctor Michael." And I said, "Who?" I genuinely was like, "Who is Doctor Michael?" Like, where he's obviously heard it somewhere or copied it from a show. And I said, "Who's Doctor Michael?" And he said, "The doctor at the hospital." And then I had a moment where I went back in my memory and went, yep, that's definitely the ED doctor's name, because they were just on shift rotation.
mm,
And I went, okay, this auditory memory is not normal for an 18-month-old
mm,
to have
mm,
that recall and the accuracy in the context that we were talking about doctors. Um, so again, another little flag. At the time, his sensory profile was starting to become very apparent. So we were sensory seeking a lot in the home. We were running around a lot, spinning a lot. Um, and again, I went, okay, highly likely we probably have ADHD. And again, we don't have a formal ADHD diagnosis for him, but it's definitely coming.
mm,
Um, in the background, though, my husband was getting his neurodiverse profile worked up. I myself have had a history of OCD, and I'm very comfortable talking about that. I've written about that in my book as well. So I'm neurodiverse in my own right and likely have either an ADHD or an ADHD profile that I'm currently diving into myself. So
Mm.
as a family, as we were seeing Alfie's development move along, we were making decisions around um, our own brains, really. And we were like,
Mm.
well, we're going to be supporting our son to eventually go for a diagnosis, because by this point it was quite apparent that we were autistic. Um, and in the background too, we were seeing the pediatrician quite regularly. So for reviews every few months from the respiratory perspective, but she was also keeping an eye on his neurodevelopment.
Mm.
We just decided as a family that it was, we need to understand ourselves better to understand him. And then that brought us to his third birthday, and we were on a wait list to see a psychologist from 2.5 years old. Um, and I would say too, in the background, we've started accessing services at this time. So he started with physio, that quickly went to OT. And then a colleague of mine and a beautiful friend of mine did a formal speech assessment on Alfie, to have the speech side covered, because obviously I'm mum. I can't write
No.
those reports to access the system. But we had all of the paperwork kind of building in the background. And then the last piece of that puzzle was the psychologist to officially diagnose autism. And then once that was done and we felt that we had all the evidence, we started going for the big bad NDIS funding application.
Fun.
Yep.
Fun. What you said, obviously he's diagnosed with autism. What level do they categorize him?
Level 2. So that in and of itself was, a really interesting chat with the psychologist, because again, she is assessing us on face value, and then does her deep dive into the actual clinical assessment. But she had said to me, he's presenting as a level 1, and that's really interesting for me. But if I was to take away all the supports, all the intervention, all of the social stories, all of the scripting, all of the beautiful strategies that you guys are doing at home to support him, and he was raw dogging it. that's what we love.
Mm.
He would be a level 2, because he's definitely autistic. It's very present. Um, and that's something that my husband and I are quite passionate about, is him growing up in a world where he knows his brain, he knows his neurotype, he can advocate for himself, and that autism is celebrated in our house. And I want to say that lightly because it's definitely tricky to raise
Mm.
an autistic child in a neurodiverse home
Mm.
when parents are also neurodiverse in their own right.
Mm.
So, yes, we celebrate huge wins, but it doesn't take away from the actual disability itself, because it is a
Yeah.
disability. It's
Yeah.
tricky. Um, I will share very candidly, actually, that it was just last weekend that Alfie learned about his diagnosis for himself. So Vince and I had always had chats around what age do we actually use the word autistic to describe his brain for him, rather than, because he's always grown up in our house knowing that people are different. And that in every way, like physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that's always been the mantra in our home. So he's picked up on this language of difference quite young.
Mm.
But in terms of actually using the diagnostic label to describe himself, we hadn't actually decided on a time or a day. We just thought when the time is right, it will present. Um, and for us, it happened on the weekend, very candidly. So we had to re-enroll him in swimming lessons, and I went up to the counter and I advocated for him. I said, "Look, I've got an autistic son. I'm going to need an instructor who understands that diagnosis, because there will be times where he may find it hard to get in the pool because of sensory
Mm.
reasons." Again, he was with me. Sometimes I'm just blown away with the amount he processes. So that was that. He didn't say anything at the time. And there was a park out the front of the swimming place, and we were playing on the park, and he said to me, "Hey mum, do you think I'm autistic?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely I do." I said, "Because you've got a magic brain." And he said, "Oh, but I'm not," this is how he's processed it, "but I'm not Julia from Sesame Street."
Oh.
And and I said, "No, you're not, because Julia is non-speaking. She doesn't use mouth words. But you do have a brain like her. You think a bit like Julia, actually." And he goes, "Oh, but what about," and he said the name of a child that we met at a park 3 weeks ago. Again, remembered the name after meeting this kid
Mhm.
once. "You told me he was autistic because that's like a boy you work with." And I said, "Yeah, he's autistic too, and so are you." I said, "Autistic just means," and he actually said, "different." I said, "Yeah, it does. It means you're thinking differently." And then I explained how that presents in communication for a 3-year-old. I said, "Sometimes people use mouth words and sometimes people don't." And I said, "Sometimes you actually are a bit like Julia. When you're upset, you don't use your words anymore." And that's true for him. He completely shuts down and reverts to pointing and gesture.
Mm.
Um, and he said, "Yeah, I think so. Actually, I am like Julia." So he was just processing that. And I've got a lot of beautiful neurodiverse affirming books at home that I use clinically and I use with my clients all the time. And I told him it's time for me to read them to you because they mean something for you now. And so that's been, this whole week has been about autism and um, understanding what it is. And now when some of his sensory sensitivities come up, we're using that language around the fact that
Mm.
he says, is that my autistic brain? And I said, yes, that's why you love being in the dirt. That's why you don't like being wet. Like, we went through all the profile that he has. So I think the point of that story is just that it's never too early to start empowering a child with their diagnosis.
Mm. Mm.
Because I get that a lot in the clinic. Parents will ask, so when do I talk about this with my kid? Like, do I wait until a certain age? Do I wait until school? I think the answer is A, there's no shame in it. So the sooner the better. But also when the situation candidly presents itself, I think is the best time.
Yeah. Tash, a few things I wanted to ask. The first thing is you mentioned the swimming pool and how you were advocating for your son to have an instructor that understands his needs.
Yeah.
Now, I know with many parents that I work with, just finding someone that understands disability,
Mhm.
understands autism, but even knowing how to communicate with kids, it's hard. It's hard for
Mhm.
parents to find that. What was your experience with like with that, with advocating for his needs? Were you successful or were you thrown a lot of closed doors?
So, yeah, swimming's a whole journey actually, because he started
Mm.
swimming very young because of the hypermobility. I was like, let's just get this kid in the pool as soon as we can. Um, the place we're at now, which is very close to home, and we re-enroll and unenroll him around his chest, actually, like around his respiratory. So in winter, he's off
Mm.
swimming, and then we pick it back up in summer. And the place we've been at now, they're great, and they've been around, like the center's been around for years, and I think the instructors there, some of the seniors have been there for like upwards of 25 years. So I know they were like, yep, we can put him in this class because this person's worked with every disability that you could name in her time. And that's been great. But prior to that, at the center we were at prior, there was actually, it was the first time as a parent, so we didn't have a formal diagnosis yet, but I knew it was coming. It was the first time in my journey that I had to really pull advocacy and fight
Mm.
for my son, because they were benchmarking him. He was in the 2-year-old class at the time. They were benchmarking him as a 2-year-old when I had clearly stated, because of his motor delay, that he was functioning like a 12 to 18-month-old in
Mm.
the water. So when they turned around and said, "Oh, your son's not able to move up to 2.5 group," I said, "Well, yeah, I've spoken to you. It's on his file that he's actually, his body is not behaving, quote unquote, as a
Mm.
2-year-old." So I said, I don't really understand why, firstly, we're standardizing and marking him against a milestone that I've clearly told you he's not going to meet. And even though I really honestly was totally okay that he wasn't moving up. I didn't want him to move up because he wouldn't have been able to cope with that class.
Mm.
I still had to fight. It was just the first experience as a parent where you are fighting for your child in a world that honestly is not set up for them. So if the swimming place had grouped kids by ability, that would have been very different, but they were benchmarking by age and milestone. And I think that's your big thing with neurodiversity is that brain is never going to tick the milestone checklist. They just won't. They're going
Mm.
to develop in their own way at their own time. And I think that's your big marker of neurodivergence in general, is that you're going to have high skill in some area and low skill in others, and you can't, some like meeting on the average and checking against the average is never going to work for that brain, because that brain is actually wired differently. um
So true. So
yeah.
true, which is why when we're looking at children, I feel even when we're assessing, we're so negative with what the child cannot do, but more, can we start talking about what the child can do and celebrate those wins? Because the more we celebrate the success of what a child is capable of doing, they're more likely to continue to succeed it that way. And as you said earlier,
Absolutely.
there shouldn't be a benchmark with these kids, because sometimes it is too hard for them to reach some standards, but
Mm,
they can actually excel other standards too. And I feel in the academic system, and even your swimming situation, we need to recognize that more, especially when there's a growing prevalence of children being diagnosed with autism as well, these in our
mhm,
current times.
absolutely.
Um, I love that my children are much older, so we don't watch Sesame Street. So the fact that you mentioned Julia, the
Mm,
character, I love that he's able to relate to something he's watched, and having Gestalt language processing, the fact that he could have that narrative there to go off. But even now, as a 3 and nearly 4, for
mm,
him to say, I'm autistic and therefore I'm struggling with this sensory need. The fact that his emotions are not dismissed. He has a reason and
mhm,
understands it more now. That's profound, Tash, at someone so young. I don't even think adults know that now at their age, that are in society.
yeah.
How did you find that easier for him to do you find it easy? Sorry, let me rephrase that. Do you find it easier now to link it back to the diagnosis when he is struggling with elements of his day-to-day living?
Yes, and, like, I'm speaking from 5 days of experience on this one, like, actually using, autism, the word, to describe what might be going on. But prior to that, I think emotional regulation was always and has always and will always be a big, um, point of salience in this household.
Mm,
Prior to that, when there was no diagnosis, but I knew again that he was learning through scripting, and that repeated script was going to stick for him. Our
mm,
script was always around a feeling being in or out of your heart. So if he was having, if he is having a really big feeling or a meltdown, um, during the peak of that meltdown, we let it ride out, because we know he's got no access, he cannot access that part of his brain that will reason. But as he's coming down, and as he's able to reason and to be in dialogue with us, our repeated line, no matter what the feeling is has the feeling left your heart? And we say that all the time.
mm,
Has the feeling left your heart? And sometimes it's no, and it's screaming and stomping and melting down. And sometimes it's almost. So he's
mm,
starting to get that barometer of what it's like to actually come back into his body. And sometimes I he will do the wiping of the hands, and yeah, okay, it's left my heart now. And that is the cue. As a family, we know that when he decides the feelings left his heart, that we can then process and talk about whatever that experience was. So now we'll just, on top of that, we will use autistic to describe that.
mm,
Like, you've had an autistic meltdown, it means it was too loud, it was too bright, or you didn't understand what was going to happen next. And that's just to give him the language around that. I think, yeah, it's never too early. And I say to my
mm.
husband, sometimes we get it wrong. Like, just because we're therapists, or I'm a therapist, and I think by proxy he's a therapist too. Um, he's not. He's a gelato maker. Um,
Which is
I
like a therapist too. We were like, for our emotional needs.
um, yeah, no, I say to him all the time, like, adults get this wrong too. We get it wrong when we're communicating. I think sometimes we need to ask each other, has the feeling left your heart, or are you still present with an emotion, because it impacts the way we communicate. Um, so I think as long as you're doing a decent job most of the time, or as often as you can, I think that's what gets you through hard times.
I love that phrase, "Has the feeling left your heart?" And I think he just sounds like a remarkable young boy, like, just he's
Thank
so
you.
intelligent with just what he's coming up with, and the fact that he can regulate using that language, that's a credit to you and your husband, Tash. Good on you. Congratulations on
Thank you.
using the skill set and consistently, and I feel that's the hardest thing with just with children, but I feel it's amplified more with having a child with a disability, the consistency of applying the strategies to ensure how we can get our child's needs met. And
Mm.
accompanying with that is the exhaustion that comes with it. Now, myself, speechy, I see the clients once a week, come back, it's like an auntie leaves the room and take
Yeah.
returns the child. Can you now you've had that clinical experience, what's it like on the other end as a parent where
Mm.
you are it's in your home 24/7? Do you wanna
Yeah.
just put that with some adjective you say, parent or clinicians or other families can resonate to it?
Yep. So this is where I get to be vulnerable now.
Mm,
I actually had 5 weeks off, from mid-August to the end of September this year, very recently, where I was at complete burnout. And again, in the background, I'm going through my neurodiverse workup. So there is a high chance that I've been burnt out, um, because of my neurodiversity, on top of raising my child, on top of running my business. I absolutely love my client community because I get to know them and hold them in a different way now, purely because I am their lived experience as well. And I'll just state from the head too. I think 80% of my caseload is neurodiverse at the moment, so
mm,
it's around me literally 24/7. And I've got these beautiful parents that were checking in on me in that time, because I was very honest with my client community and I said, I've got a lot going on. I think my email actually said, it's my time to be mum and to fight for my child like you've done for yours for so long. I need that space, because he really needs me, and he's going through massive transitions and a lot of sensory needs at this time, and he needs me. And they were all very, very understanding and happy for me to have that space. But during that check-in, yeah, I got beautiful messages from parents saying things like, how are you going on the mum side? Like, it was very beautiful to just have that connection. That's all we're all asking for at the end of the day. That's
mm,
what speech pathology is fostering connection. So I got these beautiful messages, very warm and heartfelt. And that, like, saying, like, if you need support navigating it from an emotional perspective, because you've always held us, like, let us hold you. It was very beautiful. um but in saying that, I think it was it was just a moment in my world where the diagnosis was formalized around April this year. And so this burnout then comes around August. There was also quite a lot going on in my personal life as well. So there was that part, contributing to it, but that was coming to a head around August. But I think there was a delayed processing for me, actually. At the time of diagnosis, of course, I went in knowing that it was coming the whole time. But then I think the reality of, what does the world look like for Alfie? Because in our four walls, we keep it very safe, and
mm,
he's free to be himself and his complete unmasked self. But then what does that look like when he goes into the real world? And even for us, we're seriously thinking about, we're not starting school at 5, potentially 6, because he needs more time with his motor development. So we're already fighting against a system that's like, it's not set up for him intellectually and emotionally. He could go to school tomorrow. But I
mm,
think, again, the scatter of skill with neurodiversity, he's not ready to go to school. And yeah, I think all of that started to really hit home for me as a parent. It's like, I'm going to be advocating for my son for the rest of his life. Um,
mm,
and while that's like the honor and a privilege of being a mother, it's also extremely exhausting. And I get to have these chats now with my community in a very candid way. I think, yeah, I honestly think that the burnout is real, because I absolutely love my work. I'm not going to stop that side of me. Like, that's a big part of my mission. But I also have to monitor my own energy levels, to be able to parent at the level that I want to parent as well. So it's been a I think the answer to that, it's just been a big learning curve this year,
Yeah.
like around the clock.
Do you feel like you were stuck in like a flight fight mode because you were advocating for him for such a while and then you finally got the diagnosis, you saw it written on a documentation that it's real, it's now
Mhm.
confirmed, and it's about, okay, it's like a rat race. What else can we do now just so we can give him as much support? Did you feel like you were on adrenaline the whole time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
where the burnout hit, because then I
Yeah.
I actually processed it at a cell level, and my
Mm,
body went, "Okay, now you can collapse on a lounge for a little bit while you work this out."
yeah.
And in that time, we were doing a lot of advocacy meetings with the NDIS, and we started getting that beast tamed, because we all know how long it takes to actually get the documentation together, and then there's a million meetings before you're actually funded. We're still not funded. Like, we are still in the final stages. I know it's coming, but again, the parent experience of that. So in the meantime, we've been paying out of pocket for weekly therapies all year,
Mm,
knowing that we are a family that definitely could definitely be funded, but systems take time and processes take time. So there's the financial burden. There's quite a lot that happens in the background for a family like ours that goes unseen.
yeah. Like the fact that you've been waiting for over a year that you said for the funding. Now,
Mm.
when as a speechy, when we're normally the first point of call, okay, access NDIS, like in my area, contact each. Each can then you just fill out a form, supplement it with evidence from the pediatrician,
Mhm.
speechy, or any allied health. On my end, I don't see the what you've described. I just see it as, yeah, we have a meeting and
Yep.
then a meeting, and yep, now we're approved. So for some clients, it takes a few months. For other clients,
Yep.
it can take more than a year. Why the discrepancy from your own experience? Well, do you know why it took so long,
I
or
think
is it
it's
just pure luck for other clients?
I think it's demand on area, like where
Mm,
your local area coordinator sits in that. So we were actually then we were shifted from one LGA, or like local area, to another, because they're like, you're going to be on this wait list for a long time. The demand in your area is extremely high.
mm,
And we were then transferred. So then that happened. And then by the time we got off the list from that transfer, it kind of brings us to now. The other thing too that happened was we attempted to apply before his diagnosis was official. Then it got knocked back because we needed more reports. Even I think
mm,
we had sent 2 or 3 reports in that time, but we didn't have, like, and I think it just came down to who was assessing on the day, but there was no autism written in that assessment at the time.
mm,
Um, I think even in the email, again, with the privilege I know and the way that I know the system, I had written in the email, the autism diagnosis is literally around the corner. Like, by the time we approve this, it will be in writing that there is a disability on paper, and it still wasn't enough. So then by the time we were back in the pile and like reprocessed, that's what took a year in like
mm.
overall. So once the psychology reports were finalized, we could then go in knowing, like, okay, we're definitely not going to get knocked back now because we've got something on paper, um,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
formalizes it.
So NDIS, like if I were to describe NDIS in one word, I would say migraine. Like it's just it it's wonderful for what it provides for families, but the endless run around that these parents have to do on top of everything else is so unnecessary. It's so unnecessary. Do you want to provide your input as a parent
Mm.
with your experience with NDIS and offer some support or some guidance for parents going through that process of application of the NDIS application?
Okay, I would say, I love that I can speak to this from the parent and the professional side. Um, when you do the access request form, I think, just from the experience, I think you are better situated having your therapist write supporting documentation, even if there isn't a formal diagnosis. Just in any way that they can do an observational assessment or have something in writing to say that this is likely going to come, or that there are traits of neurodiversity if it is a neurodiverse diagnosis. So that you are, and from multiple, if you can, if you've already accessed services from multiple parties saying the same thing, then your initial like filling out of the part A of the form, and then you're supplying documents, hopefully will get you through, especially for early intervention, get you through sooner rather than later. I think that's just the neatest way to go about it. And then I know it's very boring and it's like as if we don't need anything else to do, but then it's just advocacy emails and following up and following up and like pushing it faster and harder. Or like, I'm aware that, we've been waiting for 3 months, just want an update on how the application's going, or has it been received by the board? Like, having those check-ins then puts that the other side on that you're on their radar as well, and that there's like, I'm ready to have this dialogue as fast and as hard as we can. And for us, that, yeah, as soon as we actually got through and we had the initial goals meeting, again, like we became chummy with our beautiful specialist, like support specialist, and she's pushing it fast, like as hard as she can. But again, I think even the people within the NDIS understand that it is not an easy system to navigate.
Especially now with all the changes that they've implemented.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Tash, thank you so much for your honesty and being so vulnerable. So, because I feel the more parents can hear stories like yours, and particularly because you being a speechy, it's like, well, how can a speechy have a child that's autistic? It's like, well, I have a
Mhm,
child and
absolutely.
we can't control neurodiversity. But the fact that you're able to be so vulnerable and express from both sides your experiences, I feel like it hits home, and it's even making me think, oh, okay, now I know how to communicate with parents in a different way because I see it from the lens of from you today, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. Mm.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, yeah, I think I'll speak to parents in this way now. Like, there is definitely an element of exhaustion that comes with, and I say it to my friends all the time actually. Like, I'll never, because I'm in my experience, I'll never know if the last 2 years, like raising a 2 to 4-year-old, was exhausting because he's autistic, or because he's a toddler, or because he's
Mm.
both. Like, I'll never be able to separate that experience. It's just exhausting. Like, parenting is exhausting. So I'm not going to, come up on a soapbox and say like, you've got to find your self-care practices. And there are some days where you literally, from the moment you open your eyes to the moment you close them, especially with special needs, you're not getting your needs met. Like, let's just be honest, that's not happening
Mm.
during the day. So it there just needs to be a thought process. And I'll speak to, yeah, the community in saying this. Like, if you've got a family where there are special needs in that family that you love as care and support about that family, check in on them. Like, check in on them,
Mm.
because those parents are probably exhausted, like at a level that is not really fathomable to the standard population. And sometimes just getting checked in on is enough. Like, I've got beautiful friends that will say, "What can I do for you?" And I'm like, the fact that you've just asked me how I am today is lovely. Like, that you're thought about, because there are days where you'll go a few days on end without your needs even being processed.
Mm.
And coming fresh out of burnout, I know that, sometimes just that little bit of respite, like, can you come over and, throw Alfie in the bath while I'm cooking dinner just so I can breathe? Like, I'm
Mm.
not going to go and have a facial. That's really unrealistic. But for me to just process what I'm feeling, that's how you can support your community. If
Mm.
you've got the kids around you that need that extra bit of support.
Yeah. It's interesting you say the whole self-care. And society has painted this image of self-care as have that facial, book that
Yeah.
massage, go out with your girlfriends. But in the reality of raising a child with special needs, just having a moment to yourself is so rare. So thank you for raising that awareness that someone's definition of self-care is very different per family.
Mm.
What tips could you give any family going through the initial diagnosis of their child with how they can support their physical and mental health in the reality realm of special needs?
I'm still
That's it.
learning it. I'm still
Yeah.
learning it. I before I was a mum, I did quite a lot of life coaching as well. So I could recite you a whole book on self-care and what you could do. That completely shifts. It completely shifts after parenting anyway. I think I would say, like I said, it's hard because you don't really get time alone. In in the time where you do ask for help, because I think that is strategy one. You do need to ask for help if it's available to you. Um, Pull on your resources, pull on your neighbors, your community, because self care might look like just having 20 minutes to go and do the grocery shopping on your own. Like that is self care because you have time alone doing a mindless task or a task that you do all the time, and you can just process or like check in, like, how do I feel today? Like, and if I'm not feeling well, I need to reach out to someone so that that burden is shared as well. um I have one thing that I found really helpful is, and this is a free app. I'm not affiliated. I just think it's really worth downloading. It's called How We Feel, and it just prompts you 4 times a day to check in with how you feel, and you actually have to work out on a grid the word. So it's not like, oh, I feel good. It's like, I feel comfortable, I feel chill, I feel anxious, I feel jittery, and actually you pinpoint the feeling, and then you pinpoint where you are, who you're with, and what time of day it is, so you can track patterns. I found that
How
very
how
helpful.
we feel?
Yeah. I
That's
found that
excellent for even clients, like, just to help with emotional vocabulary development and tracking
yeah,
into energies and who brightens your light, who dulls your light, all
yes.
of that. What a wonderful tool. So it's for free, How You
Yeah,
Feel, and just on
how
an
you
app
feel.
store?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that strategy in and of itself, just so you have an emotional relationship with yourself, like,
Mm.
"Oh, I know how I'm feeling today." Like, I actually know. I'm not like, "Oh, I'm okay." No, I'm actually feeling a bit uneasy, and this is the reason. So it's kind of like a quick journaling practice, really. Um, Again, I think it's, if you can do your facial or
Mhm.
go to your yoga class or have that coffee with that person, that's amazing. Like, absolutely strive for that. But if we're going to play in the realistic world of with that as well, um sometimes just being aware of your emotion is your self-care practice, because
Mm.
then you are kind of arriving where you're at and you can meet your need. Like, okay, I am feeling really off or jittery today. What do I need to do for myself to bring myself back into regulation? Because we need to be there to regulate for our person, for our little
Mm.
person. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, awareness on emotion, I think, is actually the self care practice. It's the
Thanks,
most,
Tash.
it's the quickest and most accessible. That's actually going to be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for the reality check, because I feel, again, external family members don't know the depths of your challenges, and the fact that, just washing your child so you can cook dinner by yourself is even just an escape. So families need to hear that. Extended families need to hear that. So thank you for expressing that. Now, on this potty, many new grads listen,
Mm.
and we
Hey,
know
new
the
grads,
wonderful. Hi, new
we love
grads.
you. Yeah.
Thank you for all your advocacy and endless laminating. But, what's your tip from a mum to a new grad? What word of advice would you give them going if they were to meet a mum for the first time that's going through the initial diagnosis?
Oh, you know what? This is actually, I love this question because I don't want to answer it by saying like the run of the mill. Like, just be aware that there's probably a lot of emotions happening. Like, they may present forward facing, like, okay, I'm taking it in, and then they're going to go and cry in their car.
Mm,
Because I have seen parents do that before, for sure, like through my clinical career. So I'm not gonna say that, because I think our new grads, they're ready to work and they understand a lot more about trauma informed care, or um, just the idea that you need to hold space and connect with someone. I think that is going, like, that message is getting taught through uni well now,
Mm.
better than when I was studying 10 years
Same.
ago. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that. What I will say is, don't be afraid to hold space for that emotion. So you will likely say and do all of the right clinical things when you're having an initial chat around a diagnosis. But if you like, and I think this just comes down to our speech pathology practice in general. Sometimes throw every single goal out the window, and I mean
Mm.
that with so much love. Your only job, really, at the end of the day, is to provide safety and connection. Because
Mhm.
if you can hold the space, the rest falls into place. I promise you that from a
Yeah.
parent and a professional side. Um, you create the container for that emotion, and for whatever comes with that, like, there may be a really emotional moment in that session. And if you can hold that space, then firstly, you're developing trust, you're developing your connection, and the fact that they will see, it doesn't matter how old you are or how long or not long you've been practicing, they'll start to see you as the person who's actually going to champion their child or their person if it's an adult, um, and that you're the advocate for them. That, like,
Mm.
that is all you need to do. And if you can get out of your clinical head of, like, did I say the right thing? Did I do that? Say nothing. Just strip it right back. Develop the connection, and that rapport is what will carry you through, and likely they will be a long-term client.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% Tash. And as what I believe connection creates communication, and
Mhm.
fostering that beautiful relationship early in the days is just sometimes just sitting and being present, because they have attended multiple appointments back and forth and sometimes being rejected because of the waiting list, which we'll talk on another podcast episode.
Mhm.
But you just being present and being there to champion the needs for that client and just simply listening is all the session can really be, especially if the child's going through a hard time. And I think parents just need that. They need to have that space more than ever now,
Mhm.
especially when their child's going through their diagnosis. So thank you for that, Tash. Appreciate it. Is there
Yeah.
anything else? There's so much that we can talk about today, even just as a speech therapist. I'm sure we can discuss the impact of burnout, uh, applications for NDIS, workload, waiting lists, et
Yep.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't feel that's needed on tonight's podcast. It's because it's from your perspective of being a mum that's raising an autistic child.
Mm.
I have a segment on my podcast at the end of the episode. I ask all my guests, if you were to apply one word today, to be a better version of yourself tomorrow, what will it be?
For myself,
Mm.
I think it's consistency. Yeah. And that's, I like that word that came to me. Like, consistency is what has gotten me out of burnout. And I'm still on my way out. Like, I've been back at work for 6 weeks now, 5 or 6 weeks, at the time of recording. But the consistent trust in myself of, like, you just do one small thing today that is, yeah, is moving towards the best version of yourself. And to also not have the expectation that the best version of yourself is this big thriver. It's just somebody who's consistent, who's
Mm.
consistently showing up for themselves, whether it's exercise. Like, for me, that is my self-care practice. If I can do even like a 20-minute walk a day, I'm absolutely cheering.
Mm.
But consistency is what, for me, will bring my light, like, back to, its maximum glow. I think we're almost there. I can see it. Um but yeah, consistency and realistic expectation that you're already enough. You're doing enough, you're being enough, and the way that you're showing up, even if it's like today, I literally I've just supported my child all day. Like it's enough. It doesn't need to be it doesn't need to look glamorous. It's just, yeah, the bare necessity and being proud of that, I think.
I love that, Tash. That was so beautiful. I love
Thank
that
you.
because in a world where we are consistently bombarded with the glitz and the glams and of what life looks like, where we know behind the lens, it's just a narrative that people put up to because they're
Mm,
so afraid of showing their true self.
yeah.
So I thank you, sincerely, I thank you for being very vulnerable tonight and really showing the different perspective of raising a child that's autistic, but also being so true to the challenges that parents face and not painting it with a beautiful paintbrush, but more saying, look, the reality is it's a bad day. You're going to have a bad day most of the days, but the consistency is what holds you up. So thank you, Tash. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um, is there anything else you wanted to say to parents before we finish up tonight?
No, I think I I just want to thank you for having me and for having the platform that you have, because yeah, stories need to be shared. So yeah, extending that back to you, and then just to the community listening, yeah, you're enough, and reach out if you need to. And that can be to your speech pathologist, it can be to a trusted family member or a friend. Just, yeah, use your voice, because it's what is going to move the needle.
Well, Tash, you did it beautifully today. You used your words to empower the words of others. So thank you again for coming on Wine with Weeda. And thank you everyone for participating in another episode of Wine with Weeda with the lead up to Christmas. I hope you are consistent with loving yourself and being more present with who you are every day, despite all the manic that's happening. Thanks, guys, and I'll be in touch soon. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Wine with Weeda. I hope you found some new inspiration, learnt something new, or gained a fresh perspective. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you please leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the show get in the ears of new listeners, plus it takes 5 seconds. If you're keen for more strategies and insights, then head over to Instagram and follow RS Speech Pathology.